Okay. Welcome everyone. There's our guy, Arun. Hi, Arun. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for being here. So, yes, welcome everyone to Enterprise Scale Data Migration Strategies. My name is Rachel Huffman. I am your host. I am the VP of Partnerships and Customer Success here at Quadrant Technologies. For the past 20 years, Quadrant has been a provider of IT services and consulting practices around the globe, driven by a vision of constant research and innovation. As such, we have invited Arun Tyagaranjan, hope I said that correctly, Arun, who
Thank you.
you lead the product management team for AWS Migration Hub. Yes?
That's correct.
And recently, this is exciting, recently just launched a new service, like hot off the press last week, new service called AWS Migration Hub Journeys. What else can I say, Arun? You've dedicated over a decade to the field of migrations, being part of the team that launched the first AWS data migration service. Arun has helped hundreds of customers migrate their database workloads to cloud technologies. And today he's going to speak with us on best practices, emerging technologies, and more. So again, welcome, Arun.
Thank you for having me here. It's exciting to share what I know about this space, and it's always good to talk to Quadrant. So it's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, what you know about the space is quite a lot, and we've tried to condense it down into an hour. So shall we go ahead and get this party started and
Yeah,
start asking you some questions? Okay, let's
let's
do
do
it.
it.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll kick it off. Let's talk about strategy. It's what the webinar is all about. Yes.
yeah.
Um, what what are the strategies organizations need to follow for enterprise data migration, and how can organizations effectively address them?
Got it. Great question to start off. It's actually one of my most favorite questions, and I was you know, sort of reflecting upon this and preparing. I thought something like this, I could talk about it for hours, but let me
Right.
try. Let me try to give you guys a condensed version of this as much as I can. To me, having been in this space for quite a long time, migrations are not just about the tools that you use or
Mhm.
the goals that you're trying to achieve. From my experience, I've seen three big pillars always come through. You always need an optimal combination of these three big pillars to pull off
Okay.
large enterprise scale migrations. The first one is the people, the most important component of all of this.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the application owners, the experts who are involved in the migration, who are in the game doing what they do, right? So it's always about enabling the people to do the right thing. The
Hmm.
second one is the process. Hey, when do I do what? How do I approach this? The start of the strategy is also part of that process, and being able to create a repeatable process across dozens of teams within an organization is also
Hmm.
key to success. And the
Absolutely.
last one is the tools or the automation that comes with it. You have the process, you know what to do. What can you do to accelerate individual pieces in that process? So, can we put the slide on the window here? So,
Yes.
we'll walk through the process. So, this is one of the first things that you need to do when you think about migration strategy in general. As a former engineer myself, I like to think of it in the form of algorithms. So that's why I've portrayed it
Naturally.
this way on the slide.
Of course.
So you basically discover what you want to migrate, why you want to do it, and all the fun stuff around ROI, which I think we'll cover later part of this talk as well. One of the first things you need to determine is, hey, is this app that I'm trying to migrate or the database I'm trying to migrate actually important for my company? Do I really need to retain it or do I need to retire it? Because that's one of the places where you could find some things to save and reduce complexity overall and really be nimble when you come to the cloud, right?
Hmm.
And then conversation shifts into, hey, what kind of application is it? It subdivides into three big pillars around sustain, optimize, and grow. The growth part is all about, hey, I'm going to be cloud native. I'm going to be moving into a more modernized stack. I don't want to think of this application or workload as a monolith that has been around for the past few decades in my organization. So you go after a refactor. So you re-architect the entire application into microservices. You really modernize the entire stack. The second level is the optimized part, where you say, hey, I need to keep certain components of this, but at the same time, I want to migrate into places where it gives me operational advantage. And I'm talking about, let me give you an example, like a database. I want to move that to a fully managed service like RDS, for example. So that is one part of replatform. The other way to think about it is also just replace the entire solution with a commercial off the solution, like plethora of things available out there. That's also part of a migration. And if it works out from an ROI standpoint, you probably don't even need to do the migration in the first place. And lastly, the sustain part, where you're just thinking about, I'm going to, and I've worked with dozens of customers like this, if not hundreds, where they say, I have a data center lease expiring and I need to move as fast as possible. So that's when you consider things like a lift and shift. You just rehost what you have, come to the cloud first, and then figure out what to do from a modernization standpoint. And it could also be some relocation plays there. So a thumb rule, which I live by when I talk to customers, is that bottom part of the slide there. Uh, if ROI is not of concern or cost is not of concern, and you're really wondering what exactly do I need to do across these categories. So typically, if it is less number of changes, sometimes you have a very well architected application that can work across any database. And I'm now talking just about the data migration piece. I'm talking about the ODBC, JDBC workloads. You just put the application connection string and you are on your way to refactor. And I'm talking about heterogeneous migrations like Oracle to Postgres, for example, right? Which is something Quadrant does a lot with customers, and we'll talk more about it. And then it goes all the way down to category 5, where moving it out of that particular database is very difficult, but at the same time, you're able to really rehost and move to the cloud, which is still going to offer you advantages in terms of capital cost and operational cost as you move into the cloud. So that's the way I would think about it. Per application, really hone in on working with your people and experts, come up with a plan, get sign-offs along the way, treat it like a journey that needs those three pillars in general from a migration execution standpoint.
Excellent. Brilliant. And thank you I know I personally am so much of a visual learner in person. So thank you so much for dropping that visually for us. We know it's crucial to keep a finger on the pulse of emerging technologies and trends that can significantly impact how organizations handle their data. In your expert opinion, Arun, what emerging technologies or trends are influencing the landscape of enterprise scale data migration today?
Wow, that's one of my favorite questions. Thanks for asking that. I work in product
management. All my
so,
questions, Arun. Come on.
That's product strategy is one of my favorite things. I'll give you a quick dump of what all I have been doing from an emerging technology space, some of the experiments I've been doing. I have a very interesting example to share as well. Uh, we'll get to Gen AI. I'm sure everybody is talking about generative AI, and you can already see that's part of the answer here. I'll get to that in a bit, but concentrating specifically on the data migration pieces. Off late over the past year or so, and at least at AWS, we had a bunch of announcements in space also. Everybody is going towards more of a zero ETL future. So typically, a large enterprise needs their data to be available in multiple data systems. I'm talking about flat files for querying using services like Athena. I'm talking about relational databases, non-relational databases like DynamoDB and DocumentDB. I'm also talking about data warehouses like Redshift, right? So in order to, because each of these data systems have their own advantages, you use them for different jobs to be done. um, Typically customers and enterprises put in a lot of money and effort to write ETL solutions, extract, transform, and load solutions to bring their data and co-locate them into some of these systems. These are expensive, error prone, needs a lot of testing, and when things change and the pipelines break, someone's getting paged at night, and it's not a nice thing to be part of, right? So what clouds like AWS have done, and there are a bunch of other solutions out there in the market as well. They're taking the heavy lifting of setting up and monitoring and validating these ETL pipelines away from customers. With a single click, as long as you have appropriate permissions for the automation solution to assume permissions and start streaming and piping data into these downstream systems, the data just magically appears in these downstream systems and the customers get to use all of this. It's as simple as that. So
Wow.
uh, with the advent of more technology, the zero ETL nature, I know a very good startup called PeerDB that does it natively in Postgres. And there are zero ETL solutions available today in Amazon Aurora Postgres, DynamoDB, for example, that take all the data and stream it into Redshift for downstream cube analytic processing. So that is one emerging technology out there. I put it in here because it's sort of moving data. It's not really migration because it was going to be a migration problem. It's not anymore because of this zero ETLness that is coming through these emerging technologies.
Right.
The second piece I want to call out is uh, the the penchant around heterogeneous migrations. And when I say heterogeneous migrations, it's about customers really wanting to move away from old guard database vendors like Oracle. There is a licensing issue in there. You pay a lot of money to use it, even though it's a pretty good database.
Mhm.
And then you don't want to treat your applications as a monolith anymore. You want to have microservices, have individual teams taking care of these microservices, and bringing a sense of a startup like culture in your organizations for you to be agile and more data driven.
Mhm,
So
absolutely.
there is a bunch of customers who really want to do that because even though it's hard, it's sometimes you need a lot of experts to get it done. The downstream advantages you get from doing heterogeneous migrations through tools like schema conversion tool, or I know Quadrant has a solution called Q Migrator as well. It's going to be very useful for these customers to save up on costs,
Hmm.
really hone in on that ROI as they go into the cloud, and make a good case for the migration to the cloud when they try to move the data by itself. And lastly, it's the world of Gen AI. Everybody is talking about it.
Yeah.
There is a bunch of places where Gen AI could really make migrations a bit more simpler. Like I
Hmm.
talked about in the strategy question, migrations are all about the process, and the process, in my mind at least, is a bunch of tasks. You put a bunch of experts on these tasks, get that guidance, execute, and you go meet the goals of your migration effectively. And this is what Migration Up Journeys, the service we launched last week, does, by the way. So I'd really recommend that you guys go check it out. It's pretty cool. I'm happy to answer questions on that also. But where Gen AI is going to play a part in these migrations is two places. One, you need to be able to get the guidance to do that task. You need to be able to know how to do that task. And it's all about asking the right questions, doing some good prompt engineering for the Gen AI model to give you the right answers so you can just follow those instructions and go do it. There is some risk around hallucination, and there is some risk around not getting the right things at all times, which service teams like ours will take care of eventually. The second part is, as I called out, there's a journey. There are a bunch of tasks that you need to go through, and of course, because you're going from one tool to another in terms of automation as part of the migration, you need to be able to share context between these tools. So
Hmm.
Gen AI today, it's all manual. Sometimes there is integration between services and tools that make it a little easy, but Gen AI could really form that shim data layer that holds all of the context in one place. So every tool understands when it's turned for a migration tool to act on it. The migration tool knows what source to go talk to, what target to go write data into, and really, compress that entire timeline by itself. So that's I'm pretty excited to see what the entire space looks like, what the trend looks like, for example. And for an example, here's another recommendation I have based on my testing until now. At reInvent last year, Amazon launched a new service called Amazon Q. It is a
Hmm.
chatbot that uses an LLM, uses retrieval augmented generation to answer questions. Q also came up with a way to create business apps, almost like your own local chat GPT that can control the amount of data that goes into it. And you can also put some usage guardrails and authentication guardrails around it.
Oh
So
my.
recently, I played around with it. I fed it some very credible migration guidance related data, put it behind an identity provider, an internal identity provider, let it train for about 24 hours. And I was asking it questions using natural language, and it was telling me what to do from a migration standpoint. And at the same time, Amazon Q-like solutions can also interface with a database like Postgres or MySQL. And instead of having to write long queries, once I attached the database to my business app, I was able to query the database using natural language.
Wow.
I was literally asking it, hey, at this point in time, get me this data from this table, and I was writing it in English as opposed to writing a SQL query.
Yeah.
So that's where I see the trend and the technology going towards. With zero ETLness, we'll need to redefine what data engineers do, in my opinion. Maybe something about data scientists as well. So we'll need to really hone in and see how the space is evolving, and maybe it's going to be a different role altogether. Just like how DevOps came into being with the emergence of cloud technologies, it'll
Hmm.
be interesting what Gen AI does to the data world, and I just wanted to call that out based on my experience and research till now.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think we could do a whole other session on emerging technologies. Heck, we could do a whole other 2 hour session on that third
Yeah,
on what you just spoke about, right? But
yeah, yeah.
um,
We could show. I could whip out a demo and show you guys the app. So that's
I
what
think
it does.
I think we've got some content for our next webinar now, Arun. Great. You actually touched on this a little bit from the first question, so I'm going to throw not quite a wrench at you here, but because you mentioned something when talking about the three pillars. Um, so data migration is not just a technical endeavor, right? It's a strategic decision that can have a profound impact on an organization's operation and the bottom line, right? Which is what executive leadership is really interested in. How do you define data migration scope and then come up with the ROI for the business justification?
Great question. There are multiple places in which I can explain this answer. I'll To start off with the scope, it's going back to that strategy we talked about, right?
Mhm.
You make some determinations initially. Uh, Again, this is where services like migration of journeys are going to help you out, because almost like a TurboTax like experience where you announce your goal and it tells you what exactly to do. And one of those things that you need to do from a scope standpoint is sit down with your application teams, fill out questionnaires, understand what the application does, come up with metrics to understand what the uptime of that application should look like, what it does to the business, how it justifies making value for the business, etc. And once you have the scope, it dives deeper into having multiple waves, prioritizing those waves of applications that you need to migrate, and then going through the journey of, hey, am I ready to do it? Am I bought in on the migration? Is this a good idea for me to migrate? Is it going to give me a good ROI to migrate? And
Mhm.
once you've done all of those is when you're actually ready for your execution piece. So at any given point in time, I have seen this initial process of qualification, let's call it that, take anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks. in the first place, because you really need to hone in and understand, hey, is this the best thing for to do for my business? Because
Right.
once you move into the cloud, it's almost like a one-way door decision,
Mm-hmm.
where it's very difficult to move back. You'll have some rollback strategies and things like that, but by the time you've moved in, you've spent a lot of money, time, and effort,
Yeah.
and it's very important for you to understand what that initial scope looks like by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go to your ROI question. There are multiple uh, level swings I can take at that question, but I'll state one important thing in the interest of time. Basically, when it comes to an ROI, everybody thinks along the lines of, oh, how much am I going to spend in the cloud? Is it lesser than what I'm spending here? But people sometimes forget the fact that there is much more to it. For example, let's say you spend $10,000 on prem and you're spending $5,000 in the cloud. Yes, you save money, but if you are spending 3x more time operating it and looking at operational issues, you're
Precisely.
not really getting ROI out of it,
Right.
right? So the way I try to think about the ROI is, from my experience, I've seen a direct correlation between lack of mechanisms for cost management when it comes to the planning and execution, that directly relates, and it's directly proportional to the ROI that you're going to get once
Mm-hmm.
you move to the cloud. If we could bring the slide up one more time, sorry, I had some examples to share, and each migration takes a pretty phased approach. You go through an assessment, like I called out, like the planning phase, then you have a mobilize phase where you do a POC and you set up governance and all of that, you set up the entire infrastructure, and then you go in the migrate operate phase where you're doing the migration and you're done with the migration, right? So when it comes to cost management and concentration in each of these phases, especially in the assess phase, it's very important to note we need some metrics being set up as part of
Yeah.
that phase to measure ROI downstream, right? Like for example, I put some examples that I could think of in the screen there. Cost and productivity analysis. Hey, how many dollars per user transaction are we getting? Is it max per admin? The percentage IT infrastructure spent from annual revenue, and then it goes into general performance and resilience and security. Some of these metrics, when you move to the cloud, you can automatically get it by onboarding onto some of our amazing managed services, at least in AWS, like the AWS Resilience Hub, for example, can look at your resilience and tell you your resilience scores, your application availability scores, the number of hours of planned downtime, etc. So it's important to come up with a list of metrics and also have ways to measure this on premises versus the cloud. So you're not just looking at the dollars, but you're looking at these metrics as well to really tell you what that ROI is all about, right?
Right.
Then the second part is, in the mobilize phase, you concentrate on getting the visibility and realizing the benefits of this ROI. This is where you tap into programs offered by cloud providers. Like AWS has the migration acceleration program, that based on how fast you migrate, they give you credits. And then you have other capabilities like AWS budgets that keep your entire migration budget under control. You can put a budget in there, say, alert me if I cross this budget, and it's going to tell you, okay, now something is going on. You're at the risk of not meeting your initial ROI goals, right? And then there are other tools that I can think of, like the cost anomaly detection. So that
Mm-hmm.
is the mobilize phase. And then when you come into the operate phase, is when you look at different things like, okay, am I utilizing my instances correctly? What does the CPU utilization look like? What does the memory utilization look like? Can I downgrade my instance type to save up on money? Can I use burstable instances instead? Can I use new architectures like Graviton instead that give me a lower price performance ratio? And that's where you continue to optimize further to realize the most ROI out of your migration. So I can keep going, give you more examples on this topic, but you get the idea around
Yeah.
how you do it per phase there.
Great. Metrics, 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 right? Data is king.
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's see. And I think we have a lot to cover. So I think I'm going to move on to my next question. Yes, best practices. Let's talk about best practices for assessing the readiness of an organization for these large scale data migration initiatives. Can you share with us about that?
Absolutely. Having launched journeys, every time I think about these things, it's all mini journeys in my brain. So I'll give you a quick mini journey to think of. If you could share the slide again.
Yeah,
So these are 6 pillars to think of from a readiness standpoint. These are what we call perspectives in the cloud adoption framework. So you assess an organization's readiness across these 6 pillars in order to understand how successful you're going to be with the migration journey. And it covers things like the business pillar. These are your business managers, your strategy decision makers, your executives, etc. Then you have your people in the organization, communications, change management, common roles within the organization who use your solutions. Then the governance, platform, operation, security. You get the idea, right? Like different kinds of people in the organization need to think about cloud migrations differently. For
absolutely.
example, the platform team is all about, hey, you're giving me a task, I'm going to go execute it. I don't care about how much it's going to cost me. I'm just going to make sure it's going to the cloud. While business people care about cost, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's the way. And then when you're setting things up, you're creating landing zones, you're creating resources. That's when your governance and compliance team and your security teams need you to follow some best practices and rules, right? So it's all about not just your technical teams knowing cloud technologies, how to do the migration. It's also about different kinds of perspectives in the organization, understanding what cloud readiness really means and what cloud migration really means, right? So that
Mhm.
is one perspective of it. The second perspective is it's all about judging how ready an organization is. If you could look at this screen here, the y-axis shows you the value, the x-axis shows you the time. A typical customer starts their cloud migration journey with a small project. They tinker with things, try to understand. They try to do different things, and sometimes burn their fingers to learn a bit more from that process. And then they move to this space where they understand what it takes to do the cloud migration. And that's when this organization, along with time, they are starting to realize the value of the cloud. That's when they're also thinking about forming a center of excellence team across all those pillars you saw in the previous slide over there,
Mhm.
where they have rules, they have best practices and things like that to try and understand how to help other teams in the organization go do this migration. And with those rules is when you decide, okay, I have these applications, are they going to be cloud native? So I'm going to move them to the cloud, or am I going to retire them? And that's when they keep getting value out of the migration. They keep increasing the value, and it goes to a point where they're completely cloud native. They start to think about modernizing things even further. So that's what the readiness, I call this the readiness curve, looks like typically when it
Mhm.
comes to thinking about migration readiness. And I'll give you an example. So at least in the foundation space, where the technical team could be like, hey, I know how to create accounts, I know how to create databases, and I know how to do a small migration. But the team that set up the accounts in, let's say, San Jose, and there's another team in Bangalore, India, they have no idea what the team in San Jose did. So there are
Mhm.
no knowledge sharing mechanisms, there are no readiness sharing mechanisms. So that's how CCOE teams, as they move from the foundational space to the place where they have the reinvention, they reach the reinvention curve, a large enterprise spread across the globe tries to understand what to do. And this is where things like migration readiness assessment come into picture, where you first sit down as a team, you try to understand your strengths and weaknesses. Once you understand that, you then create action plans to go address those weaknesses. And one of the action plans could be, for a team that is in the project stage or the foundation stage, could be go create your own center of excellence team now. And then additional outcomes get driven, thereby it gets tracked as its own readiness mini journey as part of a large migration ecosystem within that enterprise. And that's how typically customers try to engage with these migrations. And two thoughts: one, the migration readiness assessment is a service or
Yeah.
capability that AWS offers. So if someone's looking to migrate to AWS, that's available. And then there is another initiative called experience-based accelerators, where you sit down, do a POC with AWS experts to try and understand those best practices. So there are programs like that, initiatives like that available as well for you to accelerate along that curve to improve migration readiness.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you again.
Of course.
Beautiful visualization, right? With pictures too, even better.
Yeah. Pictures speak 1,000 words.
They do, indeed. Let's see. I'm just wanting to make check for the time. Good. We're doing good. Let's talk about, you just mentioned you mentioned a couple of tools actually since we've been in this conversation today. And one of the key decisions that organizations face when embarking on these enterprise level data migration projects is the selection of tools and platforms, of which we know there are many, many, many. What considerations should organizations take into account when making these selections, when selecting these tools and platforms from the myriads and myriads that are available to us in the market?
That's actually a great question. There are, and I'm going to concentrate just on the data migration piece. And by the way, just migrates the data. Everybody migrates the entire stack, but I'm going to concentrate on the data migrations piece itself. There are several key factors to consider. It depends on the team. It's not just about the features that these tools support. It's about stuff like the data compatibility. Does this tool support your formats and the structures of both the source and destination systems? It's about the scalability. Can it depends on the volumes of data that you have, large volumes of data. Is it static data? Is it ever changing data that requires change data capture and ongoing replication type technologies that are much more complex to use, much more complex to monitor, etc. And then depending on the amount of data, amount of changes you are thinking about, data quality and integrity, can you validate, can you check for the accuracy and consistency of the data that is going through? There is ease of use, there is speed. What sort of speed can you? And I have worked with systems where we had to go tweak the migration because at the rate at which it was going, the target would never catch up. So that's the level of complexities I have personally worked with. And then there is error handling, security, compliance, etc. But at the same time, let's bifurcate and branch this out into two parts. One is homogeneous migrations, where it's like to like databases. I'm talking about MySQL to MySQL, Postgres to Postgres, etc. We talked about the rehost scenario. We also talked about the replatform scenario. So homogeneous counts towards those. And then there's heterogeneous migrations, much more complex and much more uh, it's like a financial concept. The more risk you take, the more outcome you get out of it, right? So heterogeneous migrations are like that, so you get better outcomes out of it. So when it comes to specific tools, homogeneous, at least in my brain, the algorithm goes, when I talk to customers, I prefer and recommend that they use native backup restore solutions as much as possible. It's straightforward, easy to use, gets the job done, and even native replication solutions in case you need near zero downtime. Right? For example, if you have a 100 GB Postgres database, nobody uses the application at night. You could just spend half an hour doing a backup restore of that database and call the migration complete.
Sure.
So when you have the opportunity to keep it simple, because I'm sure you have more complicated things to do as an application developer or as a database developer, right? Uh, then if you really need near zero downtime, which is the next stage, that's when you start considering a CDC solution or a replication solution. Again, homogeneous migration. I would not do what we call logical replication, where a third-party app sort of looks through the transaction log, reads changes, analyzes them, takes them into a separate format, and applies them to the target. You typically use those type of solutions for heterogeneous migrations, but you could use physical replication solutions where applicable. And there are times when replication solutions, especially when you're going from one managed service to another, it's not going to be possible. And that's when you consider a logical replication solution to come down. It all boils down to the cost, the complexity, and your ability to get test and validate your data, right? As you keep going down, yes, you're going to get near zero downtime, but that also increases the complexity of testing. That also increases your cost. And there's another chunk down below that, which is like going into things like bi-directional replication, where you get true zero downtime migrations because you have replication going in a cycle or a loop between two databases, and you slowly move connections from one database to another, thereby nobody experiences downtime. Now, that is going to add much more complexity into it. You're going to think about conflict resolution, things like that. And I can also tell you that it's the most expensive thing to do, because not every solution and tool or service out there does this in a very good manner. And even in the Postgres world, only recently extensions like PG Logical have started doing complex things like bidirectional replication. So it depends on what you really need, the approach, and how you want to choose going down the stack by itself.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet. I got that. But thank you for sharing that, because that was really insightful. I think we have time. I've got a couple more questions for you. I think we have time for. Okay, as we explore the intricate world of data migration, and we encounter a fundamental challenge that organizations grapple with, and that's finding the right equilibrium between doing things quickly and the imperative of meticulous testing and validation. So on the one hand, there's the pressure to complete data migration swiftly and minimize the downtime, right, which we talked about. But on the other hand, we can't afford to overlook that critical step of making sure that data is accurate and it has integrity. How do you do that? How do you balance the need for speed in data migration with the necessity of thorough testing and validation throughout the whole process?
That's a great question. Not just scenarios like this in general. Having seen different kinds of migrations and different ways in which customers have approached migrations, and I saw this being done really well when I supported the Amazon.com migration, where we moved all of the Oracle footprint into a combination of Postgres, Redshift, and S3. It
Wow.
was about 14,000 databases. Smaller problems are easier to handle. So if you have a large problem, it's always good to chunk them down into smaller problems, and if possible, have different sets of people tackle each small problem. And that's how I would treat a question like that, because you have this large problem, you need to be fast, you need to validate, you need to handle complexity. So com- try to really convert them to smaller problems. For example, some of the things I could think of is you could probably migrate critical data and first just move the critical data and have a very solid team, a very experienced team concentrate on that, because nobody is forcing you to migrate the entire thing, especially
Right.
when you're migrating terabytes of data, right? So look for critical data for your apps. One other place I can think of from a complexity standpoint is older systems used to notoriously do this. I actually don't recommend doing this anymore. This principle of large objects, like you have some customers sticking PDF documents into their database, some blobs and clobs into their database, like a binary lob column that really slows down migrations, because typical database engines need to do a double lookup to bring those lobs. So maybe you can re-architect the lobs when you're moving to the cloud. You don't need to put the lobs in the database anymore. That bloats the database up to TBs. You can probably go store that in an object storage like S3, Amazon S3, and then point your application to go retrieve your logs there instead of having to do it with the database, where you can have much more nimbler, agile development with the database once you move to the cloud. Then you I call this you migrate what you need layers. Sometimes multiple applications use a single database. So in where you're migrating the entire stack, you're just taking chunks of data that is needed for that particular application, and thereby really reduce the complexity of that problem. But you still need to do all of the important things downstream, like validation and making sure things are accurate, etc. It's just that because you're chunking it out, it's much
Mhm.
more easy to do now, and you're not staring down the barrel of terabytes of data, right? That is one piece. Do what you need to do, concentrate on the important one, and then incrementally do other things.
Yeah,
And
that's
then I cannot uh, put more emphasis on the importance of scripting. That's what enables repeatability. For example, let's say you're migrating foreign keys for a database. You could probably script that out and share it with hundreds of teams within your organization.
oh,
Maintain one single place to keep improvements flowing. Same with conversion tests. If you're going from Oracle to Postgres, this is one of the things I did. Part of my experience at AWS and Microsoft, there is we authored a guide on how to approach these conversions. So you could go do a lookup, and it will clearly tell you, okay, this Oracle object is should be stuck into this particular Postgres object when you're attempting a migration. So you could go use things like that. And lastly, you know, you just need to monitor data quality KPIs. Look at your latency graphs. You look at your validation issues. Look at the number of changes flowing through the system. It's very simple to just look at the number of changes flowing through the source, the number of changes flowing through the target. If they look good, it means like an eyeball test, things are looking good, and you can do a much more deeper validation check at a later point in time after the replication has caught up. So those are some of the things I would do to sort of balance out the speed you need and also the validation. Overall, just chunk the problem down into smaller chunks, smaller manageable chunks, and that is your secret for success in this
right.
complex.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, I think I want to give the audience some time for their own questions. So I'm going to ask you one last question and then let the audience post some questions. All right. So for those of you who have joined us today, I think we've got some popping in, but do you think, let's see, actually, no, sorry, Arun, I want to make sure we get some audience questions.
I can read out the questions and answer it.
Great. Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So one of the questions is how to ensure data migration is performed at scale and at a faster pace to handle large scale enterprises. Anthony, great question. It goes back to some of the concepts we talked about, especially in large scale enterprises, because of the number of teams and number of different kinds of applications that you're going to have. It's important to set a foundational baseline and some rules around the migration itself. It's not about the execution, but it's also about the planning and making sure a center of excellence team is formed. You guys work with that center of excellence team to create those rules, create some readiness assessments, understand that, hey, these are the rules, and this is based on these rules, this is what you attempt to do for that particular migration. For example, some enterprises I worked with have gone down to a point where, hey, if you have an Oracle database without logs, do this. If you have an Oracle database with logs, do Y instead, without going into too much details. If you have this particular use case, do this. So it almost is like creating those rules and really democratizing those rules with individual teams, along with guides and abilities for those individual teams to go follow. For example, again, uh, the migration of journeys we launched that converts a migration into a pipeline of tasks is a templatized platform. So a center of excellence team, let's say they have 5 different use cases to migrate, they would have 5 templates that are part of that platform. Add individual teams to this platform, and you go use the right template to do exactly what you're supposed to do for that particular use case. So that's how I would handle it in a large enterprise. It's all about the readiness. It's all about using the right targets that you're trying to go to and the right tools. It's all about defining it up front and helping the individual teams go do it. Almost like building a program around that.
Mm. Right. I'm actually curious for you to answer Jack's question. How do we decide cost of migration and TCO?
Um, Actually, the the way I would that's a loaded question.
Oh,
I can think of various ways to do that. It boils down to what I call a directional business case. So, like we talked about in the strategy discussion on how you would approach a migration and how you'd approach a migration journey, it boils down to your goals, where, hey, is it you want to keep it as is and you want to be as productive and you want to keep the cost the same, etc., or do you what actually are your goals for that application? Are you looking to grow? Are you looking to have 100,000 more users in the next year? Maybe you need to re-architect it. So that's what dictates the migration scenario. That's what dictates what target architecture that you're trying to go solve for, and that's what derives the cost as well. So if you're going to do a lift and shift and you're just going to do a migration as is, like move your servers as is, it's going to be less complicated, it's going to cost you less as well. But if you're going to go after a much more modernized stack where you're literally re-architecting every layer in your application, it's going to cost more, and maybe you want to do that because of the obvious advantages it's going to give you down the road.
awesome. I mean, that makes sense too, right? It's not, again, there's no silver bullet answer to that question either, right? Every every customer is different based on needs and scale, right?
Correct.
I think what I'd like to do now is actually invite, with a little bit of time that we have left, you've mentioned this several times today in our discussion. I'm going to invite Prasanth on stage. He's our technical director of cloud and data migration at Quadrant, and we're going to talk about QMigrator, which you've mentioned a few times. It's our proprietary tool about heterogeneous database migration. And there he is. Hi, Prasanth. Nice to
Hey,
see
hey Rachel. Hi Aaron.
you. Yeah. And if we have time at the end, I think this is going to be short and sweet. If we have time at the end, we can answer more questions on what's been posted in the comments page.
Good.
Sure. I think it was a really exciting session. Thank you, Arun. So he has covered a lot of critical nuggets about data migration. I mean, barking upon these core concepts, I think we have developed our Q migrator as the as a our product, which we have developed for the data migrations effectively end to end. That we have been assisting our customers. Now, the Q migrator is definitely our flagship product, which is helping customers migrate from a source database to a target database, and the source can be into any of the MySQL, Oracle, or other databases, and from there to the PostgreSQL across various clouds. So it's a cloud agnostic product that we have developed over the multiple migrations that we have handled, and with the customers effectively positioning. I mean, one after the other, there are multiple problems that we have seen, based on which we have built a feedback loop into the product back, which is really helping us to improve the overall migration capability. Uh, so let me move. Oh yeah. So we have the QMigrator's core web interface and the engine in between our source and the target, where we do the conversions right from on-prem to the various cloud technologies. and this is helping us to deploy our Kubernetes images into a cloud agnostic interface. So the point which Arun has mentioned about the true time to value is really the core principle with which we have developed this accelerator, which really helps the customers to ensure that they bring in the right migration value with a reduced timeline, as well as more value to the ROI after each migration that we do, and also the modernization roadmap that they're into. So we do have a detailed process, a phase-wise approach that we take. So just like Arun has been elaborating over the last couple of minutes, so we do initially start with the planning and assessment phase, where we understand what the database workloads are, what's the volume, and what's the migration complexity. And then we have a deliverable about the overall migration plan, and from there, what should be the configuration, target database, the connectivity, how do we configure the source and target, and what should be the infrastructure. And then we get into the core migration, and what at what pace, what should be the right infrastructure in order to target a super fast migration or the replication setup, high availability, etc. And then the critical component of validation, it's not only the data validation but functional and performance validation also, we have baked into the product, which gives you a detailed validation reports. And along with that, we back it up with a strong warranty or a hypercare in order to make sure post production we do have the right support for the customers with the issue resolution. So net we have seen core very great value adds that we have generated for the customers with efficient planning, where we do have a detailed reporting and a quick migration with 75% reduction in the timelines, and zero disruption, as we understood how effective is an online migration. So we have made sure that there is no disruption to the ongoing business, and overall cost savings for the customers. So definitely, I think the principles and the core features that we have within the product are really helping our customers to address the concepts of critical enterprise scale migration. Thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Prasanth. That was awesome, short and sweet. Way to wrap it all together with a bow for us today. Well, so we do have a couple of extra minutes, and so if there's any questions about
Can I take my favorite question?
And I was there to pick the one that, yeah, that's absolutely, we got time.
I think it will be useful for everybody. It's a question from Dean Langley. How do we choose the right database? Essentially. That's actually a very, very good question, and it's part of the initial planning stages as well. So of course, the answer goes with, hey, it depends on what you really need to do. But the way I would really think about it is, what exactly do you need for that database to do? What, for example, one of the biggest pillars is, what kind of querying capabilities do you need? Are you just looking for a database? And this depends on the nature of your application as well. Are you just looking for something that can help you query based on a key? Are you looking to, add in a lot of where clauses, add in a lot of conditions into your queries, etc.? So if you're just looking to do it based on a key, a key value data store like DynamoDB is probably the best choice, because it's a non-relational. It, provides you with abilities for fast retrieval, and for fast retrievals, it also helps you control the IOPS and everything. So you pay for what you use, and you get your stuff faster. Are you looking to do is your application depending on some sort of and going back, if it's lots of conditions and where clauses, you're probably well off with a relational database like Postgres or MySQL. And the other things I can think of are, how much storage do you need? Are you looking for infinite storage? And of course, infinite is figurative in this case, where it's auto scaling, and it just the performance of your database does not get affected as the amount of storage increases. You're probably looking at object storage like Amazon Glacier or AWS Amazon S3, for example. Then you talk about latency and scale. of accessing this data? Instead of running it in EBS volumes, do you want much more faster access to your data that reduces the latency even further for your application? That's one consideration as well. And lastly, it's also, very special workloads, like let's say fuzzy search, for example. You want to put in search related capabilities within your application, and we are dealing with this in my service right now. And one of the considerations is services like Elasticsearch, where it's easier to create indexes, and it's able to offer better tagging and searchability experience for the users by itself. So it depends on the database. And there is a I'm unfortunately not able to post public comments, but there is a very good blog out there on how you should be thinking about choosing the right database for your scenario across the cloud ecosystem by itself. So it also depends on, hey, do you need a managed database versus a self-managed database? Like about 99% of our customers that I work with want to go with managed databases for obvious reasons, right? So it all boils down to, again, your needs, your outcomes that you're trying to drive. And of course, we talked about this in the readiness conversation as well, where you have tracking metrics for your migration and your ROI. It depends on those items as well, because this choice can get really expensive very fast depending on how you use it. So you have to be a little careful about how you interpret your metrics with that choice, and then go about migrating to cloud-based systems.
Excellent. Well, I think a lot of folks are going to be searching for that blog that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
All right. Well, 2 minutes left. Is there, another one?
Let's take another one. We got time.
How do you handle data corruption in case of failures?
So data corruption, I'm guessing it's about, you're not talking about the corruption in the database. That's a completely different problem to solve. I'm guessing you're talking about validation issues that prop up during the migration, right? Going back to one of the principles I called out, a small problem is a better problem to solve. It's an easier problem to solve. So it depends on the scale of data corruption. Uh, so one way of handling this is when you do comparison tests as part of the cutover, or you have a validation tool. There are some open source validation tools out there. If I'm not wrong, QMigrator also does some validation. There are some other validation solutions out there that are part of managed services like AWS Database Migration Service. They help you detect these anomalies as part of the migration, and you will know the amount of anomalies that got introduced for whatever reason, right? It could be a bug in the data migration solution, or someone wrote into the target database causing a data validation issue, right? So it depends on the scale of the corruption or the validation issue. If it is a few records, it's probably good for you to just take care of it manually, or do that, write some scripts, and as part of the cutover, take care of correcting that data out. But if the scale starts becoming large, this is where in my opinion, you should not even be in this position when you're during the cutover. You should have monitored this well enough, well in advance, to understand that something is not going on well, and probably really root cause it. But if you are dealing with hundreds of thousands of servers, it there are two options. And the first option is pretty expensive. There are tools out there that can also do validation, detection, and correction. Uh, I can't remember the name of the tool, because most of my customers, some of them have opted to use that, but it's pretty expensive, so I don't remember the name. I apologize. But the other option, and the safest option in my opinion, is to restart maybe the migration for that particular table, or if it's multiple tables, just maybe do some sort of logical replication just for those tables, and do it from scratch just to be safe as part of that. You don't want to know that there is a validation issue and then still continue to go down the path of that migration. But before it becomes a full-fledged problem, monitoring should have caught it, and I would recommend trying to up the game on your monitoring side of things as well.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Arun. This is how we acknowledge people in the Zoom world when we're on Zoom. Thank you very much. Somebody clap. Or you can clap like this because I have volume. But thank you so much. So incredibly insightful. If anyone has more questions, you can, I think, send an email. Can I talk? Send an email. We'll make sure that your questions get answered. Stay tuned. This is the first in a series of webinars to educate and make aware. And we really appreciate, Arun, again, you putting this together, taking the time, all of your insights, incredibly valuable, and all the best with the launch. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone else, for joining us today. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Arun.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.